Okay, guys, today's lesson is going to be covering 1 and 2-step equations. So remember from yesterday's lesson that order of operations are parentheses, exponents, multiplication and division from left to right, and then addition and subtraction from left to right. So if we're trying to simplify an expression, we would move from parentheses down through the order of operations until we get to the last step would be adding or subtracting from left to right. When we're solving an equation, we're going to be using those order of operations backwards. So we're going to be simplifying any addition and subtraction first using an inverse operation. Then we're going to be simplifying any multiplying and dividing by using the inverse operation. Next, exponents, and then last would be parentheses. I just mentioned inverse operations a moment ago. We need to remember that inverse operations are the opposite operation that you see in the equation. So if the equation has an addition sign, to undo that operation, we're using the inverse operation of subtraction. If we see subtraction, the inverse operation would be addition. Multiplication, the inverse operation would be divide, or it may be easier to think about it as being multiplying by the reciprocal. And then divide, again, the inverse operation is multiply. Again, it might be easier to think of it as multiplying by the reciprocal. That way, when you have fractions, you don't have an extra step to remember. You can just always remember multiply by the reciprocal. All right, so we're going to take a look at some examples together on solving 1-step and 2-step equations. So this first example reads x plus 7 is equal to 2. So notice that I see an addition sign in the prompt. So I have to use the inverse operation of addition to solve this. So the inverse operation of addition would be subtraction. So I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides of this equation, keeping the left side and the right side separated by that equal sign. Okay, so now I'm going to simplify both sides of the equation. On the left, the add 7 and subtract 7 would cancel out, and we're just left with x equals. On the right side, we have 2 minus 7. So if we simplify that, 2 minus 7 gives me negative 5. So we have x equals negative 5 as our final answer. The next example that we're going to take a look at together is t minus 6 is equal to negative 8. So again, the operation that is listed in the problem is minus 6. So I have to think, what is the opposite operation of minus 6? And hopefully we were thinking addition. So we're going to add 6 to both sides of the equation. Again, the sides are separated by the equal sign. So if we simplify that left side, the minus 6 and the plus 6 will cancel. So we just have t equals, and then negative 8 plus 6, we just have to simplify that. Negative 8 plus 6 would give us negative 2. So our final answer is t equals negative 2. The next example has a fraction in it. Don't let that scare you, but it says negative 1/2 t is equal to negative 16. Okay, so I have to think, well, what operation do I see on that left side of the equation? And even though there's not a sign there, negative 1/2 t means negative 1/2 times t. So what we said about the inverse operation is if we see multiply, the inverse operation is divide. But when we go to divide, we're going to have to divide by that negative fraction. That might cause some confusion. So it would be much easier if we think multiply by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal means you just flip the fraction over. So I'm going to multiply both sides of the equation by the reciprocal of -1/2. So if I take the reciprocal of -1/2, that would be -2/1. Again, I just flipped that fraction over. Whatever I do to the left, I got to do to the right. So I'm multiplying the right side of the equation by that same value, -2/1. All right, so we have -16 times -2/1. I'm going to stick that -16/1 to make it a fraction. So remember, guys, you're just multiplying straight across. So you're going to multiply those two numerators together, and you're going to multiply those two denominators together. So -16 times -2 would give me +32. And 1 times 1 is just 1. So technically that's over 1, but 32/1 is just 32. So I don't really need to write the over 1. So I get 32 on the right side. So this side simplified to 32. And over on the left side, if we look, the -2/1 times -1/2, those items will cancel out. That's just 1. So 1t, I don't have to write the 1, so I'm just going to say t equals 32. Okay, so even though that had a fraction in it, again, rather than thinking divide by the fraction, it's much easier to multiply by the reciprocal. So anytime you see a multiplication problem or a division problem, it may be easier to think multiply by the reciprocal. All right, our next example says P divided by 4, or P over 4, is equal to -8. P over 4, again, over kind of means divide. Okay, so the operation that I see in there is division. So the inverse operation would be multiplication. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 4. All right, multiplying by 4 and dividing by 4, those two are opposite operations, so those are going to cancel. We just get P on that left side of the equation. And then -8 times 4, that's going to give me -32. So P equals -32 is my final answer to that equation. Now we're going to move into two-step equations, which means that I'm going to have 2 steps in order to solve the equation for the variable that's listed. This first equation says -3x minus 12 equals 15. So again, I'm thinking those order of operations backwards. So I have to think, I need to get rid of any adding and subtracting as my first step. So in the equation, I see a subtraction sign. So the inverse operation to subtraction is addition. So we're going to add the 12 to both sides of the equation. The 12s on the left side are going to cancel out. -12 plus 12 makes 0. And on the right side, 15 plus 12, that gives me 27. If I bring down anything that I didn't use, I'm going to bring down that -3x. So now I have the equation -3x is equal to 27. So on the left side, the operation that I see is multiplication. So the inverse operation would be division, or you could think multiply by the reciprocal. I'm going to divide both sides by -3. If I were to multiply by the reciprocal of -3 is -1/3. We're going to get the same result if we do that. So there's no difference in those two steps. So on the left side of the equation, -3 divided by -3 just makes 1. Again, I don't have to write the 1 in front of x, so I'm just going to say x equals, and then on the right side, we have 27 divided by -3. That's going to give me -9. So x equals -9 is my final answer. Our next equation says 3/4 x plus 7 is equal to 22. All right, so if I think about what operation I would do first, I see multiplication, 3/4 times x, and I see add 7. If we're thinking order of operations backwards, got to take care of any adding and subtracting first. So the inverse operation to add 7 would be to subtract 7. So we're going to subtract 7 from both sides of the equation. +7 minus 7 gives us 0, so that is going to cancel out. And 22 minus 7 is going to give us 15. On the left side, I'm going to bring down the 3/4 x. And again, the operation that I see on the left, 3/4 times x. I could think divide, but dividing by a fraction is kind of tricky. So we're going to multiply by the reciprocal instead. So the reciprocal of 3/4 would be 4/3, 4/3. Again, we just flipped that fraction over. The reciprocal means you flip it. Since I'm multiplying the left side of the equation by 4/3, I have to multiply the right side of the equation by 4/3. And I'm going to make that 15 into a fraction by just sticking it over 1. So we're multiplying 15 over 1 times 4/3. Multiplying straight across, I would take 15 times 4 for the numerator, and the denominator, I would multiply 1 times 3. So 15 times 4 gives me 60. And 3 times 1 gives me 3. Now notice that I can reduce that fraction. 60 divided by 3, I can divide those. So we should reduce that fraction when we can. So 60 divided by 3 is 20. So my final answer is x equals 20. All right, the last example that we're going to take a look at together says -5x minus 26 is equal to -45. The first opposite operation that I'm going to take care of, I see minus 26. So we're going to add 26 to both sides of the equation. -26 plus 26 on that left side makes 0. So those are going to cancel out. On the right side, -45 plus 26, that's going to give me -19. On the left side of the equation, I'm just going to pull down anything that we haven't used, which is the -5x. -5x means -5 times x. So the inverse operation, we're going to divide both sides by that -5. On the left side, -5 divided by -5 is just 1. I don't need to write that 1, so I'm just going to say that's x equals, on the right side, -19 divided by -5. Notice, guys, the negative 5 does not divide evenly into negative 19. I can simplify the signs. Negative divided by a negative makes a positive. But then 19 divided by 5 doesn't go evenly. So I am just going to leave that as an improper fraction. 19 over 5, or 19 fifths. That is the preferred form for all fractions. So if you have a simplification problem and it does involve fractions and it does not simplify to a whole number, we would prefer that you would leave the improper fraction. So this is my final answer. X equals 19 fifths. All right, guys, this last slide is a you try. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video right here. Try those 4 equations on your own. When you're ready, go ahead and unpause the video and I'll have the answers here in just a moment. Okay, go ahead and try those. Okay, we're back. Part A, we get r equals negative 9. We use the inverse operation of divide by 5. In part B, since there was a fraction, we multiplied by the reciprocal. The reciprocal of 4 fifths was 5 fourths. That gave me 10 over 12, but that could be reduced. So if we divide both the 10 and the 12 by 2, we get the reduced form. X equals 5 sixths. Okay, part C, we got x equals negative 10. And then D, x equals negative 7 halves. Here I got negative 21 over 6. That can be reduced. We divide them both by 3. So 3 goes into negative 21 7 times, negative 7 times, and 3 goes into 6 twice. So that gives me the reduced form of negative 7 halves. Okay, guys, hopefully you're doing okay with solving 1- and 2-step equations. If you have any questions, make sure you reach out to your teacher.